On a quiet morning in St. Paul, Minnesota, the unthinkable happened. Heidi Firkus, a 25-year-old woman full of promise, was shot dead in her own home just days before the birth of her first child. Her husband, Nick, the man she had loved and trusted, was the one to call 911. At first, it seemed like a tragic case of a home invasion gone wrong. But as the investigation unfolded, a darker truth began to surface. Welcome. This is Crime Uncovered, where every case has a story, and the truth is often stranger and darker than fiction. If you are yet to subscribe to my channel, kindly do so to stay updated on the latest crime we would uncover next. In the quiet, suburban neighborhood of St. Paul, Minnesota, Nick and Heidi Firkus lived what appeared to be a typical American life. Married for several years, the couple seemed to have everything that many would envy: a home, a stable job, and the hope of a future filled with love and happiness. Their neighbors knew them as the well-liked couple, always polite and friendly, seemingly untouched by hardship. Nick was a hard-working man with a reputation as a dependable neighbor, while Heidi, his devoted wife, was the picture of warmth and care. They had built a life together, full of shared dreams, community values, and religious faith. It was a life that many people would look at and admire. On the surface, everything appeared perfect. But as with many couples, there was much more lurking beneath the seemingly flawless exterior. Behind closed doors, Nick and Heidi were facing the same struggles that many young couples grapple with: financial difficulties, pressure from work, and the complexities of trying to raise a family weighed on them. While they tried to maintain the facade of control, the weight of their mounting debts and the unrelenting pressures of adult life took their toll. Heidi had no idea that her husband, the man she trusted with her life, had been hiding their financial troubles from her for months, if not longer. He kept the grim reality of their situation a secret, believing he could somehow resolve it without her knowing. The couple had met years earlier, when they were both in their early 20s. Their relationship was built on shared faith, a commitment to their community, and a deep sense of connection. Their love blossomed quickly, leading them to marry young. They had always talked about having a family together, and by the time 2010 rolled around, they were ready to start that family. Heidi, at just 25 years old, was about to give birth to their first child, a baby boy they had named Barrett. The couple dreamed of raising their son in the home they had worked so hard to build together. But the financial pressures they had been concealing were not going away. Despite their best efforts to stay afloat, the bills kept coming, and the weight of unpaid debts continued to grow. By the beginning of 2010, it was clear that the Firkuses were on the brink of losing their home. The foreclosure notices had started to arrive, each one adding another layer of stress to their already complicated life. Still, Nick tried to keep up appearances. He maintained his image as a hardworking, reliable man, unwilling to let Heidi know the truth. He convinced himself that somehow he would be able to fix it before she found out. Heidi, blissfully unaware of the financial crisis that was unfolding around her, was focused on the more immediate and joyful aspects of life. She was days away from becoming a mother. She was excited, filled with love and anticipation as she prepared to meet her son. The nursery was ready. Tiny clothes were folded neatly in drawers, and the future seemed filled with endless possibilities. She had no reason to suspect that the future she had dreamed of was about to be shattered in the most tragic and unimaginable way. Nick's attempt to shield her from the crushing reality of their financial situation would have tragic consequences. As Heidi busied herself with preparations for Barrett's arrival, the dark cloud of impending foreclosure loomed silently in the background. And while Heidi had everything to look forward to, Nick was carrying the burden of their debts alone, desperately trying to figure out a way to salvage their home and save face. The walls were closing in, and the pressures of both their financial instability and the demands of impending fatherhood were about to collide in the worst possible way. As the days ticked by, Heidi's excitement for her new life as a mother grew. But little did she know, the life she had imagined for her family was about to be torn apart in a moment of unimaginable horror. On the morning of March 28, 2010, Heidi and Nick Firkus' life took a horrific and unimaginable turn. What began as an ordinary Sunday morning would soon become a nightmarish chapter that neither they nor their families would ever be able to erase from their minds. The sun had barely risen, and the world outside was still in its quiet slumber when an unexpected sound shattered the calm of their home at 1794 Minnehaha Avenue. The front door handle rattled, the sound unmistakable. Someone was trying to break in. Still groggy from sleep, Heidi was the first to stir, her heart racing as she heard the unsettling noise. Nick, too, was immediately jolted awake. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. With the weight of 1,000 thoughts rushing through his mind, he leapt out of bed, his heart pounding. His eyes darted to the corner of their bedroom, where the shotgun rested, a weapon they kept for protection in an uncertain world. Grabbing the gun, Nick's thoughts were clear. They had a plan. If something like this ever happened, they were to head straight to the garage, escape, and call for help. It seemed like a simple plan, but in the panic of the moment, nothing was simple anymore. The tension was thick as they rushed downstairs, Heidi close behind, clutching a few personal belongings in her hands as if the objects could somehow offer comfort in such a chaotic moment. The quiet of the night was now broken by the pounding of their hearts, the only sound louder than the rattle of the door handle. They moved quickly, their bodies driven by fear, adrenaline surging through their veins. The door to the garage was within reach, but the danger had already crossed their threshold. As they neared the exit, a shadow moved in, and in an instant, the door burst open. An intruder had forced his way inside. What happened next was a blur of terror. Nick's breath quickened as the figure loomed, a dark silhouette against the early morning light. In the split second that followed, the chaos escalated. Nick, armed with the shotgun, found himself caught in a brutal struggle with the intruder. The weapon became a weapon of desperation as the two fought for control. But in the confusion of the moment, Nick later claimed he didn't remember exactly how it happened. One moment he was holding the gun, the next, a deafening shot rang out, echoing through the house. The blast struck Heidi, the woman he had promised to protect, right in the back. The force of the shot sent her sprawling to the floor. She fell without a sound, her body crumpling lifelessly to the cold kitchen floor. The woman who had been so full of life, full of plans for their future, was gone in an instant. Nick, still gripped by panic and disbelief, looked down at his wife. Blood pooled beneath her, and the room seemed to spin in slow motion. His heart clenched in a vice grip as he realized the unthinkable. The woman he loved was no longer breathing. In the midst of the chaos, Nick had been injured too. A bullet, fired in the madness of the struggle, had grazed his left leg. The pain was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the devastation he felt as he turned to look at his wife, her body motionless on the floor. Heidi, his best friend, his partner, his love, was gone, and he was left with only the weight of his actions and the scream of his heart echoing in the silence. The 911 call, recorded in real time, captured a desperate and frantic Nick Firkus, his voice trembling as he pleaded for help. "I've been shot. My wife, she's dead. She's not moving. She's not breathing," he stammered, his words a mixture of panic and disbelief. The dispatcher tried to calm him down, urging him to stay on the line while help was on the way, but Nick's distress was palpable. His voice cracked with fear and confusion as he repeated the same horrifying words over and over, as though trying to make sense of the nightmare that had unfolded in his own home. The responders arrived on the scene within minutes, their flashing lights illuminating the quiet neighborhood. The air was thick with tension as they rushed inside the house. Inside, they found Nick, bloodied and disoriented, lying on the floor near the front door. His left leg was injured from a gunshot wound, but the sight that truly stopped the responders in their tracks was Heidi. She was lying motionless beside him, her body still, her eyes open but unseeing. The scene was chaotic. Nick, hurt and still in shock, surrounded by the unsettling silence of death. The dispatcher's voice echoed in the back of their minds as they rushed to stabilize Nick, but the stillness of Heidi's body weighed heavily on the room. Something wasn't right. As the officers secured the area and began to process the crime scene, their initial thoughts turned to the possibility of a home invasion gone wrong. It seemed like a clear-cut case. An intruder had broken into the house, confronted the couple, and in the ensuing struggle, both Nick and Heidi were shot. But as the investigation unfolded, glaring inconsistencies began to emerge, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and suspicion. One of the most baffling discoveries was the lack of any signs of forced entry into the home. The front door had been left unlocked, which would typically indicate either the intruder had access to the key or that someone inside had let them in. But there were no signs of a struggle around the door or anywhere else in the house. No shattered windows, no broken locks, no sign that the intruder had broken in. The front door had simply been opened. That fact alone sent a chill down the spine of the investigators. If it was truly a break-in, why were there no physical signs of forced entry? The questions only deepened when the investigators turned their attention to the couple's planned escape. Nick, who had a shotgun in his possession, had been the first to react when the rattling of the door handle broke the silence. Why hadn't he stayed upstairs, in a position of defense? He could have waited at the top of the stairs, ready to confront any intruder who might come through the door. Instead, he and Heidi, in a panic, rushed downstairs and attempted to flee to the garage. Why? Was this part of a carefully thought-out escape plan? Or was there another reason they both felt compelled to leave the house so urgently? The more investigators dug into the details of the crime scene, the more questions began to emerge. There were no signs of a physical struggle in the foyer, no disarray, no overturned furniture, and no broken objects. It was as if everything was carefully in place, except for the tragic scene in the kitchen. The most unsettling detail was the lack of any fingerprints on the doorframe or the shotgun. According to forensic tests, there was no DNA evidence on the gun that didn't belong to Nick Firkus himself. Despite the chaos of the situation, the gun had seemingly only been touched by Nick. How could this be? In a desperate struggle with an intruder, it was highly unlikely that the weapon would only be touched by the homeowner. The absence of any struggle, the lack of forced entry, and the presence of only Nick's DNA on the gun and door frame began to form a troubling picture. Could this have been a carefully planned act, staged to look like a home invasion? Had Nick Firkus, in the throes of mounting pressure, created this false narrative to cover up a far darker truth? The more the investigators considered these questions, the more the truth seemed to slip further out of reach. The facts weren't adding up. The police and detectives were now faced with a growing suspicion that Nick Firkus may not have been the victim of a home invasion after all. Instead, could he have been the architect of the entire tragic scenario? Could it be that Nick, struggling under the weight of his failing finances and the secrets he had kept from his wife, had resorted to an act of violence to escape the consequences of his own actions? The investigation was far from over, and the more the detectives pieced together the fragments of the story, the more the shocking truth seemed to edge closer to the surface. As the investigation deepened, detectives uncovered a chilling pattern in Nick Firkus's behavior, one that pointed to deception, hidden motives, and a growing sense of desperation. It became increasingly apparent that Nick had been concealing the full extent of their financial troubles from Heidi. For months, the couple had been teetering on the edge of financial ruin, struggling to keep up with bills and the mounting weight of debt. The Firkuses were drowning in a sea of overdue payments, their home no longer theirs to keep. Yet, despite the looming threat of foreclosure, Nick had kept his wife completely in the dark. Heidi, whose dreams of starting a family were at the forefront of her mind, had no idea how close they were to losing everything. Heidi had been preparing for the birth of their son, Barrett, excited and full of plans. She spent hours decorating the nursery, choosing baby clothes, and counting down the days until the moment she would finally meet her child. But unbeknownst to her, the family's future was crumbling, and her husband had been hiding it all behind a mask of normalcy. Nick's desire to keep up appearances, to protect his pride, had led him to lie to Heidi about their financial situation. He had assured her everything was fine, even as their bank accounts drained and their debts piled higher. Why did he feel the need to lie? What was he trying to protect, and what was he truly afraid of? The truth hit like a sledgehammer when the investigators discovered the couple's eviction notice. The Firkuses were set to be kicked out of their home the very next day, March 29, 2010, the day after the shooting. Heidi, who had been eagerly awaiting the arrival of their child, was completely unaware of the impending disaster. The police learned that not only was their home about to be taken from them, but that Nick had been working to hide the depth of their financial collapse for months. This discovery painted a stark picture of Nick's actions. He wasn't just trying to protect Heidi from the harsh reality of their situation. He was trying to shield himself from the fallout. Was this why he had lied to her? Was he trying to avoid facing the consequences of his own failures? And, if so, what lengths would he go to in order to keep the truth buried? Nick's inconsistent statements during the investigation raised even more suspicion. One of the most puzzling aspects of his account was that he had called in sick to work that day, an unusual move for someone who claimed to be the victim of a home invasion. And perhaps most bewildering of all, why had Nick left his phone behind? In a time of crisis, when he was allegedly facing down a dangerous intruder in his home, why wouldn't he take the one device that could have kept him in contact with the outside world? The decision to leave his phone behind seemed odd, even reckless. If Nick were truly the victim, why wouldn't he have made every effort to reach out for help, especially considering the panic in his voice during the 911 call? Investigators dug further into Nick's background, speaking with friends, family, and neighbors to gain a clearer picture of the man behind the story he was telling. What they discovered revealed a man who had been living a double life, one of secrets, lies, and betrayal. Not only had he been hiding his financial struggles from Heidi, but it soon came to light that Nick had also been involved with another woman, Rachel. This was a relationship that he had kept completely secret from his wife. For months, he had been leading a double life, pretending to be a devoted husband while secretly maintaining a romantic connection with someone else. Nick had been keeping up appearances not just with Heidi, but with everyone around him. His lies were growing more tangled, and the web he had woven was beginning to unravel. The discovery of Nick's affair with Rachel added yet another layer of complexity to the investigation. Why had he sought solace with another woman while his wife was at home, preparing for the arrival of their child? Was this affair the catalyst for the tragic events that unfolded in their home? Did Nick's overwhelming guilt and fear of losing control of his carefully curated life drive him to take drastic action, culminating in the violent tragedy that ended Heidi's life? With each new revelation, the investigators grew more certain that the story Nick had told them was not the full truth. His consistent attempts to hide the truth, his erratic behavior, and the mounting evidence of his secret life all pointed to one conclusion. The events of March 28, 2010, had been far more calculated than a simple home invasion gone wrong. The case was quickly shifting from a possible break-in to something far darker, and Nick Firkus was at the center of it all. Weeks turned into months, and the investigation seemed to stall. But just when it appeared that the case might go cold, a breakthrough came. The police received an anonymous tip that led them to Michael Pye, a man whose image had been used by a sketch artist based on Nick's description of the intruder. Initially, investigators thought they had a solid lead, but they soon discovered that Michael Pye had been in jail at the time of the murder. The sketch had been based on a memory, and it turned out that Nick had likely been the one to provide the details for the drawing. As the investigation turned back to Nick, it became clear that the story he had told about the home invasion was fabricated. Evidence, forensic analysis, and Nick's own inconsistencies painted a chilling picture of a man desperate to hide his lies. The shot that killed Heidi, the unexplained gunshot wound to Nick's leg, and the lack of any signs of a break, in all pointed to one conclusion. Nick Firkus had murdered his wife. In August 2012, Nick was arrested and charged with second-degree murder in Heidi's death. The prosecution argued that Nick had murdered Heidi to avoid the consequences of their financial troubles and to keep his double life hidden. He had shot Heidi in cold blood, attempting to stage the crime as a botched home invasion. The defense, however, tried to argue that Nick was not guilty of premeditated murder and that the shooting had been an accident. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. Nick's own DNA was the only one found on the shotgun, and forensic analysis showed that Heidi had been shot in the back at close range. The jury deliberated for just hours before finding Nick guilty of first-degree murder. Nick was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But for Heidi's family, the verdict brought no real sense of closure. They would never get their daughter, their sister, back. The future that Heidi had dreamed of with her husband and son would never be realized. The emptiness left behind by her death was impossible to fill. In the years that followed, Nick's family attempted to move on, but the shadow of Heidi's death loomed over them. The Firkus family struggled to make sense of what had happened. How could someone they had known and loved be capable of such a horrific act? The lies, the betrayal, the deceit. Everything about the case seemed to point to a man desperate to protect his own secrets, even at the cost of his wife's life. In the end, Nick Firkus' story was one of deception, greed, and desperation. The lies he told his wife, the facade he maintained for years, all culminated in a senseless tragedy. Heidi Firkus' life was taken, and the life of her unborn son, Barrett, was snuffed out before it even began. Justice had been served, but the cost was immense. For the Firkus family, the loss was immeasurable. The tragedy of Heidi's death would forever be a reminder of the dangers of living a lie, of hiding the truth, and of the devastating consequences of deception. If you found this case as chilling and mysterious as we did, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more true crime stories. Don't miss out on future cases, updates, and deep dives into true crimes.